Hello everyone, this is Greg. I know a lot of you have been asking for more of my old school long form tutorials. Sadly, I don't have the time and resources for that right now, but what I can do working on some parts of the figure or process, I can turn on the webcam and just collect a bunch of footage and then scrub through that and put something together for you guys. So in this case, working on the fabric elements of these Lothric knights, especially their capes, I have everything sitting in front of me and can do most of it in one go, and that makes for good footage when you have a camera pointing at it. So let's take a look at the Lothric Knight cape process, alright? You can see I already have them set up. This is dyed fabric, and then I have the designs traced on already because I have them patterned. I can't show everything, obviously, because there's just too much to show, but we're going to start right here. And then everything's been traced in pencil on the fabric that's already been semi-treated. And then I use a lightweight, high thread count fabric just because it looks better. So when I have everything traced with pencil, I can easily go over it with watered down paint. Not totally watered down, but enough so it'll kind of go on easy. And then here I'm doing the gold filigree. Unless you're looking, you rarely see the back of their cape designs, even when you circle around to backstab them, just because the way the fabric physics work and everything. So trying to nail down this design and all of its complexities was a challenge, and then I did have to take some liberties, just adding some lines or subtracting here and there, because the Lothric Knight crest is different on their shield, on their cape, and the front of their tabard. It's like three different but similar designs. And then when you look at the art book and the concept art, it's slightly different just because, the development teams had to change things internally, I'm sure. We have like, 95% accuracy here with everything, but nobody's making Dark Souls figures but me, so who's really looking that close, huh? But, it is nice to just sit and have everything laid out in front of you and kind of trace for a few hours at the end of kind of the figure's work cycle, because a lot of it is just going back and forth and little things and modifications to make everything fit right. So having just kind of a flat surface and almost drawing or illustrating is a nice change of pace. And I always have lore videos playing in the background, so if you want to know more about Lothric Knights, watch those, because a cape is like a symbol of authority. They wear like not fancy plate armor, but then they have these they have a tabard and a cape because they're close to the royalty of Lothric. And then I think not all of them, but the spear and shield guys maybe were the royal guard to the queen. But then what's the deal with the Queen of Lothric? Yeah, that's a whole, I don't know. I love Dark Souls lore, so that's the only way to stay sane in the middle of just working on all of this for hours, is I really have to care about all the characters and the symbolism and what it means. So you can see right here, I'm going back in with a deep red just to really clean up the negative space between the gold lines and make them really sharp. This is on the back of the cape, but I still like to make sure things are great. And then you can see I've patterned out and traced where things are going to be cut and torn away. And then at the top right is one that's already been trimmed, let's say. And then taking an X-Acto and kind of not just cutting, but I do kind of like a cross-hatching to make it shredded at the end. Because you can just cut holes, but it won't look right. You want it to be frayed and look damaged over time, just for more realistic weathering. I always promote and advocate for realistic weathering because we don't see that even at larger scale stuff. So when you do it well at a small scale, it really sells the whole thing, because there are some things you can't do, especially with fabric, which I learned a long time ago. You can't do certain things, so you have to go for the illusion of it. So like paint comes into play. I always shit on Mezco, but they are the most popular company at a smaller scale doing fabric, and all of their clothes are just boring because there's no paint on them, there's no extra wrinkles or something. A better example is 3.0 or 3A, I think. Ashley Wood's company, or Well, his figure line, I think the company existed before, but our next review will be on one of their larger scale figures, and that's a good example of weathering in paint. But they go overboard, you know, with oils and washes and stuff a lot, but it's more of like, it's in the vein of this. So just keeping that in mind, and then whatever reference material you're looking at, right? So right here, after everything's been cut and wet and like torn to my satisfaction, I'm going in with some washes because I want it, even though it's a red cape, right? It's like you want to make it look damaged and beaten over time, and the paint, you know, out in the sun, or there's dirt on it or blood. So we're going in with like deep red washes, and then even over that we go back in with some brighter reds, some different reds, just to give it some depth and character and life. Because if it's just one flat color, you know, if you were painting or drawing, it'd be the same thing. It's just flat and boring. There's nothing worse than boring. When you go in with darkness, it gives it depth, right? Kind of like when you go back and watch old westerns from the 50s and 60s, they're all bright colored and they look like cartoon character morons. It's because nobody was that clean back then. And then when the Italian spaghetti westerns came along with Eastwood, it was grimy and gritty and sweaty and dirty with their stubble and sunburns and chapped lips. It's like, that's what you need. And of course it's fitting for a world like Dark Souls, but I digress. And then I'm adding gray here, and this is kind of the last step of painting. It's not just a gray, I lightly mix it with some red, because then you want to make it look faded, like the fabric is faded after centuries or millennia, just over time, or if it's a cape, you know, where it would drag along the ground, or around the holes, or the rips, or the tears, or burns. So that's another little thing to keep in mind, but when you look at the characters in game, they have that. So even though this is kind of a universal weathering technique, they do look like this, which is nice. You can also see at this stage, I've taken the other capes to this level. And the same goes for the tabards, even though I don't show them right now. I just had all the capes here, so it was easier to show within the span of a few hours of treating these. But I did the same thing for all the tabards. You know, I have a set pattern for the insignia, and then also a set pattern for weathering and where I'm going to cut and fray things. I know what I want to go for with like this gray for the faded paint at the end, but I can kind of be a little bit more creative and put it in some areas. But just like any other painting techniques or weathering, you kind of have to look at a real world analog, and there are certain ways that fabric will behave or change over time. And I learned a lot of this when I was into Warhammer and miniature painting, and then the masters who do that kind of stuff, or military models, they know a lot about weathering for their tanks and things. And then just researching, you know, real world equivalents. Fabric has become my thing, and I want to make sure that I'm known for being good and pleasing to the eye. Let's put it that way. And in this case, or whenever a fabric piece calls for it, I'll add a wire to the edges to make it more posable. So you can see I just lay one along the edge of the cape here and then glue it over. And it works sometimes better than others on this scale. Like some hot toys have like wired edges, but they're kind of whatever. So it's always hit or miss, right? But in this case, I know it works for capes at this scale, and it's not too, it doesn't protrude too much if it's a small gauge wire. I think it's a nice back and forth on if you want to go for it or not, but I think in this case it adds some, you always want to add some character, right, or movement. A lot of the times you can do that with paint, because at this scale, once again, it's an illusion, and there are certain things you cannot do at this scale, so you have to kind of make up for it with paint, like wrinkles and fading and weathering help to go a long way. But when you can add some movement to a piece, in this case a wired cape, just some extra thing for a person to do when they're holding in their hand, right? To give it some life or let them create their own narrative with it, even if it's just whether the cape is flowing left or right, I think is great. And I always love when figures let you kind of have fun with them in that way. As always, guys, thank you for watching. Did you like this? Was it helpful? I know it's not a traditional tutorial, but in lieu of those, I think I can offer more of these process videos where I talk about them briefly. In some case, it really depends on what parts of a project I have to work on and can work on uninterrupted, and then get enough footage and make something out of it like this. Just if it's me. Obviously, if I had somebody filming with the intense purpose of making and editing a tutorial, then I could just work and they could film, and that's how we did the really old ones. But in this case, this is what we got. So thanks again, guys. Be sure to like, subscribe. Dark Souls.